Welcome back to another episode of Shoulders Down. If you're new here, welcome. My name's Leah. I am your host. I am an intuitive eating counselor and registered dietitian. And on this podcast, I'm here to help you make peace with food and your body. Today is a fun episode. I love a listicle episode, like a five reasons why, a 10 things that, anything in that format. It's just kind of fun for me to think up and challenge myself to think in that way. So today's episode is 10 things I've learned in 10 years as an intuitive eater. This episode's going to be a little bit more sort of self-reflection, but also full of tips for you because I'm going to share with you some of the things, some of the wisdom I have learned along the way in my now 10-year journey as an intuitive eater, which is wild to think about. So, yeah, I think about when I first learned about intuitive eating. It felt so earth-shattering and completely kind of split my life into two chunks of like life before having this framework in my mind and life after. And I am so grateful all the time. And I feel like I never really lose sight of just how grateful I am because I'm working with clients every day who are actively struggling with their relationship with food and body. So it keeps me really connected to that part of myself and that part of my life where food and body image was such a struggle every day. It was something that was so top of mind. It really got in the way of my connections in life and my presence and engaging deeply with the world around me and my passions and my hobbies. It just kind of like took over everything. And I am so grateful for the massive amounts of mental real estate that I've gotten back since doing this work. And that's why I'm so passionate about doing this work because it's so much deeper than just having a better relationship with food and body. It's about all of the space it opens up for you to focus on other things. I have an alumni group with folks who have gone through my one-to-one program, and we were meeting the other day, and I don't know how it came up. I think there was this one woman where like she was expressing some frustration that a person in her life like didn't seem to care about like the current state of the world and just like the political climate and everything. And this is also a person who is deeply entrenched in dieting. And we were talking about how when you're restricting and deeply entrenched in dieting, you don't really have like the brain space or capacity to care about much else because you're not adequately nourished. You're like hangry. Your entire brain space is taken up by counting calories, by looking at the clock, figuring out if you're allowed to eat a certain thing, scouring nutrition labels, planning workouts, all of it, looking at menus ahead of time before going to restaurants, figuring out how you're gonna exercise on vacation, whatever. And it's exhausting. So you don't end up having much brain space to think about other things, other really important things like social justice or passions, hobbies, loved ones, all of that stuff. It kind of makes you self-centered in this way that like isn't your fault. It just is a product of what happens when you're under-resourced and like undernourished. It really is wild to look back on and see like how little space you have for things that really matter to you when you're so consumed by food thoughts. And it's often something that people can't even recognize until they're on the other side of it. I look back on the last 10 years and just think, wow, like I can't even imagine what it would have been like if I was still following diets and like orthorexic patterns, which if you're not familiar, orthorexia is an unhealthy obsession with health. And yeah, because my life hasn't been controlled by binging and over obsession with health and dieting for over 10 years now, I feel like I've just had so much space open up for other things, and I am so grateful. So, in this episode, we're going to talk about 10 of the big lessons that I have learned in my 10 years as an intuitive eater. Before we get into that, I want to remind you that if you're listening to this like live when it comes out, it's March 2025. If you are here with me in the present, unless you're listening in the future, then disregard what I'm about to say. But I am hosting a giveaway because March is a really special month. It's not only my birthday month, but it's also the podcast's birthday month. So 3 years ago today, on a over caffeinated night where I was up till like 3 a.m. I had the idea to start this podcast, and I can't believe it's been 3 years already. So, to honor my birthday month and Shoulders Down's birthday month, I don't know how you say that, I am hosting a giveaway. So, for this giveaway, all you have to do to enter is head to the link in the show notes and drop your name and your email. And one winner is going to win a free enrollment in my online course, which is called The Return. And that person will also win a free 1 hour session with me. And even if you don't win the giveaway, just by entering, you'll still get a 50% off discount code to use if you choose to enroll in the course. And you'll get a free 30-minute one-to-one session with me upon enrolling in the course. So I'm so excited about these giveaways. It's my way to celebrate with you and to give back to you for being here and being a part of this community. And I hope that you will help me celebrate by heading to the link in the show notes and entering. With that, let's dive into my list of 10 things that I have learned in 10 years as an intuitive eater. Okay, first thing that I have learned in my 10 years as an intuitive eater is that it's actually okay to eat distracted. It doesn't mean that you're doing intuitive eating wrong. Oftentimes, people kind of conflate intuitive eating with mindful eating, which, like, absolutely is part of it. In order to sense your body's cues and to know where you're at, you do need to employ a little bit of mindfulness. And so part of this is people start to kind of think like, oh, I'm doing intuitive eating wrong if I'm like watching TV or multitasking while eating or doing something that's distracting me while I'm eating. But what I have learned in my 10 years as an intuitive eater is that sometimes like intentional multitasking while eating or quote unquote distracted eating can actually be really beneficial. So for me, I spend a lot of time eating alone, most meals except like dinner, because I work from home by myself. And that means often I'm eating my lunch between clients or between podcast recordings or whatever it is, and I'm eating alone. And so, what I have found over the years is that I really enjoy putting on a YouTube video or a show or a funny podcast or even like FaceTiming with a friend if it works out while I'm eating. This helps to enhance the satisfaction factor for me of the eating experience. It just feels really pleasant to enjoy my food while I'm kind of laughing with a friend or a friend that like we're just like parasocially friends, like my favorite podcasters or comedian or whatever, YouTubers or whoever it is. It helps to put me in this nice relaxed state. It helps to switch my brain from work mode to relaxing mode, which helps to turn off sympathetic nervous system, which is more of that heightened system, and to turn on parasympathetic nervous system, which is nicknamed rest and digest. So yeah, I just feel like people kind of villainize distracted eating. And even in the intuitive eating space, there's like a little bit of that energy of like, oh, well, it would be better if you just like really sat there and got in touch with your body. And what I've learned in my 10 years is like, actually, that doesn't work that well for me. I feel so much more enjoyment from meals and get much more pleasure if I am watching something or listening to something while I eat. The second thing I've learned in my 10 years as an intuitive eater is that you won't always nail it. Not every meal ends in the food happy dance, as I call it. Often when we're eating dinner and I'm like eating something that I really love, I'll kind of like do a little shimmy happy dance. And not every meal ends that way. Sometimes eating, like Evelyn Tribole, one of the co-authors of Intuitive Eating, says, sometimes eating is like a sensible pair of shoes. They get the job done, but it's not glamorous. So I can think of many times where I didn't nail it. Actually, last night is one of those. I had like a late lunch and then I was home alone for dinner. And so I often feel like less motivated to like make something nice when it's just me because there's like no one to share it with. And I don't know, I just am like, yeah, whatever. My partner was out of the house. And so I ended up having this really weird dinner. I saw this girl on TikTok last night, I think was the Oscars. I always get all the award ceremonies confused. I think it was the Oscars last night, whichever one that like the Wicked cast was at, because I know that they were there. But yeah, this girl on TikTok was like, I'm eating like during the Oscars, she like made like this spread of like chips and creme fraiche, like potato chips, creme fraiche, and caviar and like other stuff was on it too, but it just looked so good. And I was like, oh, I really want that. I did not have caviar just casually laying around the house and I didn't feel like going out. And so I did potato chips and I tried to make my own creme fraiche, which I Googled and pretty much I just like took yogurt and some heavy cream, which I had in the fridge, and I mixed it together and dipped the potato chips in that. Because I didn't have caviar, I used capers, sun-dried tomatoes, and then like finely diced shallot for some like punch. I kind of wanted like anchovies. I don't know. I was really craving salt last night, but I sat down and ate this and it was fine. It was like fine, but I was just like, it's not really hitting. It's just not really hitting. And yeah, it did not end in the food happy dance, but it was fine. It got fuel in me and the show goes on. So we don't always have to be like perfectly satisfied having this like absolutely amazing eating experience. I find that happens a lot more as an intuitive eater because you're more in touch with your personal preferences and you get more of a sense of like exactly what it'll take to satisfy you. But it certainly doesn't happen every time. I don't know. The metaphor that's coming to mind, which like feels kind of vulnerable to share, but I don't know, it feels a lot like sexuality. Like when you get to know your own body more, you can probably have a better sense of like your own pleasure and like what it takes for you to experience pleasure. But that doesn't mean that like every time you have an intimate experience by yourself or with a partner that it's going to be like mind blowing. Sometimes it might just be good enough, but not every time is going to be mind blowing. Okay, that feels crazy to say because like that's not the usual vibe of the podcast, but that's the metaphor that was coming to mind. Okay, moving on. The third thing that I've learned in my 10 years as an intuitive eater is when you think you got rid of all your food rules, think again. What I mean by this is that food rules can be really sneaky and they can linger even years after you've done your sort of initial excavating of your diet culture rules. So for me, I feel like I rejected a bunch of the rules initially upon learning about intuitive eating 10 years ago. But then since then, every once in a while, I would like realize, oh, there's this other rule that's kind of like lingering, and I didn't even realize that was a rule. So some examples are a rule that took me a few years after my intuitive eating journey initially began to realize was this rule that like I needed to have veggies at every meal. So I used to be like, okay, I can have food freedom, but like, let me also have a veggie at every meal. And yeah, sometimes that feels good. Sometimes it's just like not accessible, or sometimes I don't crave a veggie at every meal. So I realized that I would say maybe like 2 or 3 years into my intuitive eating journey and started to kind of get curious about that rule and play with exposing myself to not following that rule. And then the next one that comes to mind, and this is not a complete list, but just some examples. The next one that comes to mind is a few years after that. Once I was like ordering a salad at a salad bar when I was living in Brooklyn, and the person who was working there was like, which greens do you want? And the choices were like, an iceberg slash romaine situation, or like spinach kale or whatever. And I realized in that moment that I just always default to like the spinach, the kale, the dark leafy green because of this old diet rule, more like wellness rule that said something like, why would you have romaine or iceberg? Like it's basically just water. Like you should always opt for the most nutrient dense option. And so because of that, I would always just go for the dark leafy green. When in reality, sometimes like that's not as satisfying. Sometimes it's not the taste I want. It's not the texture, the crunch, the hydration piece that I want. Sometimes it's too bitter. And so, yeah, I don't know how it came to me, but I guess just simply that person at the salad bar asking me that question made me realize, like, whoa, for all these years, I haven't even asked myself that question. It's just been default, whatever the dark leafy green option is. And so from then on out, I've like almost strictly been eating romaine-based salads because turns out I like them a lot more and they sit much better in my stomach. Every once in a while, I still like a kale salad, don't get me wrong, but it's kind of a lot of fiber for me. It doesn't always feel very good. One other rule that I think of when I think of like sneaky food rules that lingered for a long time was this rule of no sugar sweetened beverages. I noticed that it really did feel hard for me for a while to have a non-diet drink, like a Coke or a sweetened iced tea or something like that. I would say that rule probably took maybe like 7 years. So only in the last like 3 years have I really leaned into if a sweetened beverage will make this meal more satisfying, I'm going for it. And I think that's a common one that people struggle with. So, when you think you got rid of all your food rules, think again. Be open to the reality that more food rules can continue to sort of show themselves over the years. And when you notice that, or if that does happen for you, it's not a reason to be upset and to be like, oh my God, I feel guilty that I've even been operating by this rule. I'm doing this all wrong. None of that is going to serve us. It's more of an opportunity for curiosity and like, oh, whoa, that one's been hanging around kind of dormant for a while. Like, let me bring it into the light, shine some light on it, and perhaps challenge it if you can. The fourth thing that I have learned in my 10 years as an intuitive eater is that delayed gratification is usually worth it. When I was in diet culture, I feel like it was really hard to delay gratification. Like if there was like a exciting eating experience happening, I wanted it immediately and I didn't really think about anything else other than like eating the cookie or I don't know, doing whatever the thing that sort of felt like bad was because eating was so shame-based that I kind of just wanted to always do it and like wipe my hands clean of the crime. And in contrast with that, in my 10 years of intuitive eating, I've learned that it can often feel really nice when you delay gratification. So here's what I mean. If, for example, I'm like about to sit down for dinner and I'm like, ooh, I like really want to go put on like comfy pants or something, but like dinner sitting on the table, but putting comfy pants on will take me, I don't know, a minute. I will go out of my way and put the comfy pants on because it feels like it really can enhance the eating experience if I'm doing everything I can within reason to feel comfortable physically. Another example is like if I have to go to the bathroom, I feel like in the past I'd be like, oh, let me just sit down and shovel this food and not take like the extra minute to go pee, come back, and then sit down and like really get to be present and have all my needs met to the best of my ability and enjoy that meal. Another example of how this looks could be like maybe your kitchen is a mess and that could add like a little stress to the eating experience. And I get it, like so many humans are so busy and dealing with juggling a bajillion things. Maybe you have kids, maybe you're like deep in a busy season of life with school or work or whatever else it is. So straightening up your kitchen before eating absolutely might not always be accessible. But if it is, this might be another example of how taking those like 5 minutes to like even just put all the dishes in the sink and like wipe the counters or something could really help to make the eating experience more enjoyable because your brain is like, ah, yes, peace. Like the space is clean and that helps to signal peace, which helps us get in that relaxed mode, helps us activate parasympathetic nervous system, which is the rest and digest system, which puts us in that optimal state for eating, enjoying, digesting, metabolizing. One other example of delaying gratification could be when I lived in Brooklyn, there was this one time where my friends and I were grocery shopping and we got like pizza to bring home after grocery shopping from a pizza shop across the street from the grocery store. And the drive home was probably like 10 minutes. But I was like, oh my God, I'm so hungry. I need to eat this pizza now. And I just remember like trying to shovel down the pizza in the back of my friend's car. And like, it's New York City. There was a lot of stop go. I was like trying to hold my drink and like hold the pizza without getting like the pizza grease all over me. And it was just like not ideal. And I think after that experience, I had this moment of like, oh, if I just waited the 10 minutes and like sat at home, put it on the table, got to like, have a nice easy spot to put my drink where I wasn't worried about it spilling all over me if we stop short. That could have really enhanced the satisfaction of the eating experience. And of course, this is not always feasible. Like another part of intuitive eating is honoring your cues and ideally not letting yourself get to the point of like ravenous hunger, trying to honor your cues in somewhat of a timely fashion. And so in that case, it's like, yeah, I could have waited the 10 minutes, but like I was probably growing increasingly hangry if I made the decision to eat it in the car. So I don't know, maybe that was the right choice, but this is just another way of thinking about it. If, like, I don't know, if you pick up takeout and you're like driving home with it and you're like, ooh, I just want it now. Like, if you can manage to wait, thinking of it through the lens of I'll squeeze even more enjoyment and satisfaction out of this if I'm like sitting down and like kind of having it all out on the table instead of like hand to bag from the car. Not that that's anything shameful, but I personally have found it usually is really worth it if I can just delay gratification a little bit to get even more enjoyment and satisfaction out of the eating experience. The fifth thing I have learned in my 10 years as an intuitive eater is that exercising regularly is so much more sustainable when it's not about manipulating your body size. Oh my gosh, this is like one of the huge things. I always remembered before I became an intuitive eater, I was like, how do people have a consistent relationship with exercise? It felt so dreadful. It felt like pulling teeth to do any kind of exercise. And I look back and it makes so much sense to me that it felt that way because it was a very coercive relationship. It was like solely about punishing myself if I perceived myself as eating something bad or making, quote unquote, making room for food if I was like planning to eat a lot, like for a holiday or a special event of some kind. And it just felt so much like a chore and a punishment. And for the better part of the last 10 years, exercise has not at all been about manipulating my body size because I've realized even in seasons when I'm really active, my body size doesn't really change all that much because there's so many other factors at play. So instead, I think about exercise through the lens of how it makes me feel, how it impacts my stress levels, my anxiety levels, my creativity, my focus, all of these things that are also super useful reasons to exercise. And this doesn't mean that I'm like effortlessly rolling out of bed every morning and like, yes, I can't wait to exercise. I absolutely still go in seasons where I'm like, that doesn't sound good to me, especially relating to like the weather and where I am in my cycle and all of that. But for the most part, I'm able to feel less resistance around movement as a result of it not being about body manipulation and instead being about how I want to feel in my body. If you want more on that topic, I know exercise can feel so charged and like can come with so many questions. I recommend listening to the episode of the podcast with a guest named Hannah Husband, who is a anti-diet personal trainer, and they are such a wealth of knowledge on intuitive movement, how to get back in a flow with movement. So I will link to that episode in the show notes. The sixth thing I have learned in my 10 years as an intuitive eater is that building satisfying meals and snacks gets easier with practice. So I remember when I first became an intuitive eater, it was a little bit like decision fatigue and overwhelm because I was so used to picking foods and meals and snacks based on the rules and what I was allowed to have. And when I took all of that away and I was like, wait, what do I actually want to have? It was so overwhelming because there was like nothing off limits. So the choices felt almost like too many. And there was a lot more like quote unquote getting it wrong in terms of like picking something and being like, that wasn't really satisfying earlier on in my intuitive eating journey. But as I've gotten to know myself and my preferences more over the years, putting together a satisfying meal and snack has absolutely gotten easier. Like I can tell, like, okay, I usually like something like fresh and hydrating alongside something like rich and more decadent or something like that. I don't know. I just like often have like a creamy, cheesy pasta dish with like a simple salad or something for dinner. Like that's a common formula for me. That's something that took years to figure out and get in a flow with. I also have kind of like common snack formulas that work well for me. But again, all of these things certainly weren't there in the beginning. It took myself time to pull from experiences and be like, okay, I didn't like that. Why didn't I like that? What could I change? What might I add or change to make this meal or snack more satisfying for the future? Okay, noted, got it, moving on. I found that having a few go-to meals has been key, and that's something I've like sort of kept like a note of in this app on my phone. I use the app Paprika for like it's like a recipe keeper. That has worked really well for me. Also, if you want to kind of get inside my brain of like what do satisfying meals and snacks look like, you can head to the link in the show notes for two different posts on my blog. One is a list of, I believe, 16 satisfying snack ideas, and one is a list of, I think, 15 satisfying meal ideas. And they all are based off of Trader Joe's products, but even if you don't shop there, you could still benefit from them because a lot of the products you could find really similar ones in any grocery store. The seventh thing I have learned in my 10 years as an intuitive eater is that there is no failure, there's only feedback. I love this quote so much. I'm going to say it once more. There is no failure, there's only feedback. What this means is if you eat past comfortable fullness or binge or feel the urge to slip back into old diet restriction behaviors, it's not a failure. It's simply feedback. It's information that something might be going on. You might be experiencing some sort of unmet need or heightened emotion in some area of your life that is maybe triggering you to grasp for this old coping tool, whether that coping tool was restriction or binging or a combination of both, or maybe overexercising or body shaming yourself or, weighing yourself or whatever it is. It's easy to see those things as failures of like, oh, I'm on this intuitive eating journey. Like, why is this happening? What's going on? But those things aren't failures. You cannot fail on an intuitive eating journey. You can only ever learn of like, huh, what was going on here? What was maybe my body trying to tell me? What unmet need was I maybe experiencing? What was going on? And an example I'll give, which I maybe have given this example before, I don't remember. A few years ago, I was out to lunch with a friend, or maybe it was dinner. I was out to a meal with two friends from college, and I was in the city, and I was on the subway home after this outing, and I was like, whoa, I feel really uncomfortably full. Like I've absolutely eaten past comfortable fullness. And the longer you're an intuitive eater, the less frequently that happens. So when it does happen, it's an opportunity to, yeah, really get curious and figure out like what was going on here. Sometimes we don't have the answer, but sometimes it's pretty obvious. And so when I ask myself, like, what was happening? Like, I wonder what caused us to eat past comfortable fullness and abandon our body's cues. It was really clear to me upon asking that question that what was going on was that the girls that I was at this dinner with were friends from college, and it was the first time we'd seen each other in a while. And I kind of realized, like, we don't have much in common anymore. This is kind of sad because it feels like the ending of an era, the ending of a friendship. And when I look back on that experience, I feel like what happened was that I kept eating to sort of cover up and fill the void of this discomfort, this lack of connection that I was experiencing at the meal with these two people from my past. So it wasn't a failure. It was feedback of like, oh, you maybe weren't feeling a source of connection with them. And that felt hard. And it felt easy to use food to try and fill that uncomfy void. And that's a morally neutral thing. It's just information, it's just feedback. The eighth thing that I have learned on my intuitive eating journey in the past 10 years is that fun drinks can make all the difference. So, this is really personal for me. As I said earlier, when we were talking about uncovering hidden food rules, I used to view drinking calories as bad, as off limits, but ever since I've lifted that rule, I've really realized that fun drinks, anything from like a plain seltzer to like sometimes a soda or an iced tea or like a matcha or whatever, they make such a big difference in my satisfaction of the eating experience. So, like, I love a Coke with Italian food, for example, like, just absolutely chef's kiss, perfect combination for me. And I find that if I don't have it, it's fine. It's not a huge deal. But I will sort of like be on the prowl and like feel a sense of like something's lacking even when the meal's over. And that's what can lead to overeating or like fixation with food or like kind of like mindless snacking later in the night, which isn't necessarily bad, but it feels really good, I find, to finish a meal and be like, yes, that hit. I'm satisfied. I'm set for the night or like whatever. Maybe you have dessert or whatever, but like the meal really satisfied you. And I find that fun drinks can really make that difference and move the needle from like the meal was average to like, oh, the meal really satisfied me and I'm able to move on without dwelling. So 10 out of 10, can't recommend fun drinks enough. I used to not let myself splurge on them, not only from like a calorie diet mindset standpoint, but also from a financial standpoint. I think I was kind of the mindset of like water is like kind of free in some senses, like I should just drink water. And lately I've allowed myself to treat myself to things that are pleasurable and joyful because sometimes it feels like we don't have much in this life, and at least we can treat ourselves to pleasurable things. And I recognize that there's privilege in that and in so much of the things that I'm sharing on this episode. And I recognize that it might not be accessible for everyone in every season of life. I want to say that if it is, it could be a fun thing to play with and to even question, like, why am I denying myself things that sound pleasurable? Do I not feel like I am deserving or worthy of this type of pleasure? And like, what's going on there? Because like, you absolutely are worthy and deserving of all the pleasurable things. The ninth thing I have learned in my 10 years as an intuitive eater is that body image will fluctuate, but worth is constant. In diet culture, your worth often fluctuates with good or bad body image days. So if you perceive yourself as looking good that day, looking toned, looking skinny, I don't know, looking attractive according to the mainstream beauty ideals or whatever it is, then on those days you feel worthy. But if you perceive yourself as looking bad or, not liking the size or shape of your body that day, or not matching up with the mainstream beauty ideals, then you feel not worthy those days. As an intuitive eater, it's unrealistic to live in a state of constant positive feelings about your body, but the difference is that negative body image days stop impacting your worth. So instead of like, I don't like how I look today and I'm not worthy, I can't go out to this party or to see these friends or go to this event, it shifts to I don't like how I look today. I don't like how I look today. That's a bummer. And I'm just as worthy and valid as a human being as I am any other day. So I find that what realistic healing on a body image journey for me, like 10 years in, can look like isn't like butterflies and rainbows all the time, absolute constant state of bliss and appreciation for my body. No, but it's more that like with changes in my appearance that come day to day, come with the seasons, with my cycle, with just random things. Some mornings you wake up and you're like, why does my face look weird today? I find that I'm able to surf those waves of those changes or perceived changes in my appearance with a lot less weight in them and a lot less attachment because my worth is not connected. It's like my worth is constant, and those things are, yeah, they can be hard. It can be hard to feel like you're having a fussy body image day, but it's not as deep as it used to be because it doesn't spiral into like, I'm a shit person, I'm so gross, nobody's gonna like me. It just kind of stops at, I don't like how I look today. Okay, I don't like how I look today. That's a huge one. Like, number nine, shout out to number nine, body image will fluctuate, worth is constant. And I want to say again here, I recognize that anytime I talk about my body image journey, I hold several unearned body privileges between my gender identity and my unearned thin privilege and so many other things which impact my body image journey. So I recognize that though it's valid that I've struggled with body image over the years, I have not had to face systemic barriers and systemic weight stigma because of my unearned thin privilege. And so it's really important for me to say that. I do mentorship with folks with different lived experiences and an awesome mentor who lives in a larger body herself. Shout out Brie Campos. So I can learn about those things, but I recognize that even learning isn't the same as living it. So I fully own I will never know the pain of navigating the world in a body that is oppressed on a systemic level. The 10th thing that I have learned in my 10 years as an intuitive eater is that you are not morally superior for being an intuitive eater. Diet culture teaches us to attach morality to eating, which we already know, right? If you're good, if you eat clean, you're morally better. And if you are, eating quote unquote junk food and not exercising, then you're like seen as morally inferior. And the trap that I fell into when I first became an intuitive eater is that I brought that morality with me, except adjusted it to be you're morally superior if you reject diet culture and morally inferior if you're still dieting. I didn't say that outright, but that's certainly how I felt on some level. But now I don't feel that way. Intuitive eating has been life-changing for me and the 100+ human beings I've had the privilege of supporting in my private practice. But everyone has their own journey and their own way of navigating food in life. Who am I to judge? Who am I to sit here and say, like, everyone should be an intuitive eater, hard stop? Like, I don't feel that way anymore. I can say it's been so personally impactful for me and my clients. But I think a less mature version of myself, if I'm being really honest, judged people who were still in diet culture. And now I just see that with so much more nuance of like, yeah, some people are still in diet culture because it can really feel safer for them to stay with that way of relating to food compared to taking away all the rules, potentially having body changes and losing privileges. I am such an advocate for all the ways that intuitive eating changes your life. And I can recognize that for some people, they might not be in a place where it's accessible or they're ready for that or they're willing to deal with like the hard parts that come with it. As humans, we can really resist change. Our brains can perceive change as a risk and they like the comfort of the known. So even if a person is like, I get it, dieting is harming me and it's just leading me to weight cycle, and I get it that this is probably not sustainable for me, it can still be really hard to shift into intuitive eating because it opens up so much unknown. And for some people, depending on support systems and like, their sense of felt safety in life, it can just be too much to venture into that territory of the unknown, especially if you're someone who's been dieting for decades. It can be a lot. So I no longer really feel this sense of like judgment towards people who aren't practicing intuitive eating, which definitely took me time to get there. I couldn't exactly say when that happened, but when I look back in the last 10 years, I feel like it was absolutely an evolution that happened. So that wraps up our 10 lessons from 10 years as an intuitive eater. I hope you enjoyed this reflective episode. Again, I want to remind you if you're listening in real time, head to the link in the show notes and put your name on the list to be entered to win a free enrollment in my course and a free 1 hour one-to-one session with me. Help us celebrate my birthday month and the podcast's birthday month by entering that fun giveaway. If you have been on an intuitive eating journey for any amount of time, 1 month, 1 year, 10 years, whatever it is, I would love to hear some of the things that come up for you that you've learned over your own journey. You can share those with me by emailing me at leah@leahkernard.com, or you can also send me a voice note via my SpeakPipe, which is a cool app that you can leave voice notes, and the link to do that is in the show notes. Thanks so much for tuning in, and I'll talk to you in our next episode.